Cool. Well, it is 5 o'clock. Well, hi! Hi, everybody, except you people who have already been here for 5 minutes watching me test the stream. My name is pksage, and today we're going to go on a magical journey through the creation of a Rock Band custom song. Oh my god, it's so exciting, you guys. I can't contain myself. Over the next 2 hours-ish, you're going to hear a nerd, that's me, talk about this lovely program you have here in front of you, which is called REAPER. It is the program used to create Rock Band custom songs. Not the only one, but the one that you need to know how to use. And I'm going to take your questions, and we're going to have a good time. It's going to be really fun. So I don't have a syllabus or schedule of anything set up for this. My goal is to teach you things as we go. Hopefully it will be educational, and hopefully we will cover all of the things that need to be covered. One thing I did want to mention before we start is that the song we will be using, which is Dance for the Dying's Echo. Dance for the Dying is a local Washington, D.C. band that are awesome. This song is currently available for sale in the Rock Band Network. I encourage you to buy it and give me money, but if you don't want to, or if you already own it, you can download the MP3 for this song in the Reddit thread I have created for this. Let me pull that up. I will link it in the stream for those of you who are watching live. You can download the MP3, load it up into your own copy of this program, Reaper, and follow along at home. It's basically like Happy Trees. I'm the Rock Band version of Happy Trees. Thank you, Crash. If you don't have all the Dance for the Dying songs, GTFO. I must say they're pretty fun. Beyond me having authored them and liking the band quite a lot, they're a good time. Alright, so let's start from the beginning. The program that you're seeing right here, REAPER, it might stand for something, I don't know, its name is all caps, is available at the website reaper.fm. You can download a free evaluation version that is completely unfettered. It lets you do everything with just a little screen saying, hey, this program is awesome, please give us money. If you are authoring for Rock Band, you might want to consider buying the personal license for $60. I've done it just so I don't get into trouble. License for personal use. Because $60 is a small price to pay for authoring lots of customs. But then again, I was in Rock Band Network, and I didn't want to get in trouble. But regardless, once you have this, you don't have to worry about paying for it until you are a dedicated user. The Reaper guys are super cool, and you should buy it. Reaper itself is what's known as a DAW, a digital audio workstation. That just means it takes audio files, like the ones you see up here. Is my mouse showing up here? There we go. It takes audio files like the ones you see up here and lets you combine them with things like effects to make the audio files sound different. It lets you combine them with things like MIDI, which we'll explain more about in just a moment, which was currently being rendered as these lovely colors down here, and basically lets you do pretty much anything you would want to do to music. DAWs like Reaper are what is used to create lots of the world's most popular music. It's not GarageBand, because I'm not a hipster enough to have a Mac with a GarageBand. But if you like Reaper from using it for Rock Band Customs, I encourage you to continue to check it out for stuff like making your own music from scratch. Now, I've already done I've already done a shitload of things here to set up what you're seeing in front of you in the way you see it. I want to make sure I cover that for everybody who has never tried to set it up before. The program Reaper that I just described is the most important part. Go to reaper.fm, download the free trial version, and set it up on your system. Now, I believe this is the 32-bit version, even though I am running 64-bit Windows 7. Some of the plugins that we'll use that I'll describe here in just a moment don't play very nice with Windows 64. With the 64-bit version of Reaper. So get the 32-bit version, even if you have a 64-bit OS, install it, run it. You will see a screen like this one. This is our Virgin Reaper window. Now, there's a few other things you need to do before you're ready to start a project. The most important is to get the various tools that are used within Reaper to enable Rock Band custom creation. The biggest ones can be found in a zip file called customtools.zip that is linked on the C3 forums. Once again, our lovely promotional thing here. You can also find the official Rock Band Network template if you are a Rock Band Network member, but they have since made that site VPN only, so you're probably best off downloading our awesome custom template. Now, when you download that, it will come with instructions on how to install it, and I'm not going to go over that right now because it's very boring. But the point is, when you're done, you should have several Reaper templates, like this one. We're going to be using this custom RB3 template, and you should also have installed several other plugins that we're going to be seeing. But again, all that is explained in the thread. Please go check it out, customscreators.com. It is super cool. So once you have all that stuff installed, Reaper, the various templates, and your patience, of which you are going to need plenty, you're going to want to go into File, Project Templates, and open the custom Rock Band 3 template. Now this is basically the Rock Band network template that was provided to us by Harmonix, but it has been taken by our fantastic customs community members and made into something harder, better, and faster. Better than it was before, the $1 million template. Save current project. I don't have a current project. Now that's going to give you something blank like this. Each of these tracks up here is, as you can see, one part of the Rock Band setup, but that's getting a little bit ahead of myself. I've shown you how to open that, so now that you have it open, let's talk about Reaper itself. This window, this entire area up here, you see the time numbers, you see tracks, you see some other stuff. This is known as the track window. I don't know if that's the actual name. We're going to call it the track window. And each of these horizontal rows is a track. In this example, we have part drums, which refers to the Rock Band drums notes. We have part bass for the bass notes, guitar and vocals. Harm 1, Harm 2, and Harm 3 are the harmony 1, 2, and 3 parts for harmony vocals. You have keys, which has, mother of God, so many subtracks. Part keys itself is for 5-lane keys. And then these, if we expand it a little bit, you can see that we also have the expert pro keys part, hard, medium, and easy pro keys parts, and then animation tracks. This is all a little bit overwhelming. I know. We'll get to it in more detail in just a little bit. And then finally you have the metadata tracks, like events, which are where you'll put things like practice sections, venue, which is where you define all of the lighting and camera events, and beat, which is only used to determine the actual beat of the song, like how the crowd claps and stuff. And then perhaps most importantly, the custom template includes 2 tracks, one for the song count in and one for the song audio. Now, when you opened this, you might have gotten some warnings about these samples right here. It would be like, hey, I'm looking for this cymbal sample and I can't find one. Don't worry too much about that if you get a warning. You can always re-add these samples later. These drum samples are just used to give you a count in at the beginning of the song, so the song doesn't start out of nowhere and make you miss a bunch of notes. If I play it real quick, you should hear some cymbal samples. Though again, I apologize if my sound is way too low, but that's all that track is. So don't worry about it too much now if you have issues. And then most importantly, the song audio track. Now, if you're doing a Rock Band official style custom, right? If you're trying to aspire to the hallowed halls of Harmonix themselves, you are going to have multiple tracks. You're going to have stem files. Now, a song's stems refer to its separated master tracks. Like if I have full multi-track stems for a song, it means that I have all of the guitar in one track, I have all of the bass in one track, I have vocals on different tracks, and that is the best case scenario. It is fantastic to work with. Oh my god, it makes so many things so much easier, but the odds are very good that you are not going to have stems. You are probably going to be working off of this MP3 that you ripped from the CD that you bought when you were 7. And that is what we're going to do for the purposes of this tutorial. I'm going to be opening a project here in a little bit that contains a bunch of stuff that's already done, including some stems, so please do not be intimidated if you see me working with lots of multitracks, but we are going to pretend that you have an MP3, you really like the band, and that you're going to take this MP3 and make some magic. So where to begin? I guess we're not done talking about Reaper yet. The track window here is where you'll control each of the individual tracks. Each of these tracks can be muted and stuff, which we'll cover as we get to that relevant part of it, but let's cover the other huge parts of the UI here. Down here you have the mixer. This is mostly used when you're using Reaper for actual audio manipulation. Let's imagine that you are, you're the guy who has recorded a band's sound and now you're in the studio by yourself trying to make it sound as awesome as possible. These sliders correspond to what used to be done as actual physical sliders, on one of those big fancy sound boards that you've probably seen in the movies. Each of these controls the volume of the relevant track, and you won't want to mess with them too much. They are also duplicated up here, which is where I usually mess with them. Otherwise, a lot of this stuff is... how can I say this? Basically, you're not going to see too much of this thing. What you are going to see down here is the MIDI edit window, which I'll cover in just a second how to open it, but let's pretend you already have this open. This is the MIDI edit window, or the piano roll. Each of the rows over here on the side is one particular MIDI event type, basically. It's a channel. Those terminologies are completely incorrect. Please do not come down on me like a bag of hammers for getting the terminology incorrect. The point is, each of these is a row in which you can place notes, like this. Look at that note. That's a nice looking note. The row names over here, which are loaded from the template that we just opened, tell you what that row is for. Right now we're looking at the drum chart, so as an example, these 5 are used for drum fills, these 5 are used for the expert notes, these 5 are used for the hard notes, and so on. And again, I'll cover these more in detail as we get to that part of the process, but all you need to know is that this lower part of the window, which, by the way, for you, might look like... how do you undock things? I never do it myself. It might look like a separate window, like this. Pull this down a little bit for you guys. Now, I personally prefer to have it docked, which is this button right here, the dock editor, because I like to be able to switch between them like tabs, like as if you were in Firefox or Google Chrome. So for the rest of the tutorial, we're going to be in docked. I'm sorry if you do prefer the open one. Nemo, I'm not sure if you're referring to docked or floating as your preferred look, but this is my stream. You're going to deal with it. So here's the docked. And now what's cool about this is if I click between multiple ones, they will all show up here in the bottom. And you can switch between them with, I don't know if Control-Tab switches. I guess Control-Tab goes to the end right now. But the point is, it lets you see all of them in one place. If you prefer to have them floating, it lets you switch between them with keyboard shortcuts more easily. But I'll let you guys figure out how you want to handle that. While we're talking about the buttons, let's review some more of the UI elements of Reaper. Within the piano roll, within the MIDI edit window, you have a few buttons up here. This guy, as Drew just discussed, will make it float or dock it again. This magnet icon is the very important snap to grid thing. You see these vertical lines here in the MIDI edit window? These refer to the actual time increments, the grid that is currently applied to the song. The default for most of our templates is 1/16, as you can see down here, which is a very important number for Rock Band. In music, you can have notes of any duration you want. You can have them down to like a 1/128th note, which is incredibly short, or you could have a really long, like a whole note like this, that lasts an entire measure. In Rock Band, 1/16 is the cutoff where a note is treated as a single gem in-game versus a sustain. And I think we're on drums. No, we're on bass right now. And you can see what part you're on down here. If you're docked part guitar, we're on part guitar. If I were to drag a note like this, that would be a sustained note on guitar, like one with a sustained tail. And if I did this down to 1/16th note, it would be just a single note. Again, Woozer says, gosh darn it, the stream is lagging. Is anyone else having lag problems? I might be able to tweak my open broadcasting settings thingy, because I might be trying to broadcast at too high of a setting. In the meantime... So anyway, 1/16th, very important. If in doubt, always have your things set to 1/16th for the grid. There are exceptions, like vocals, that we'll get to in a bit, but 1/16th is your god. Treat it with the respect that it deserves. To save the sanity of other people who are going to be looking at your song file, for the love of God, do not use 1/32nd, 1/128th. A lot of songs that we see converted from other things, I don't know if Phase Shift does this. I know back in the day, God, what was that old program called for Guitar Hero 2 customs? Would create things as like 128th notes. But anyway, use 1/16th. You will love it. People who look at your thing will love it, and we will include you as one of our own. Okay, so that's the grid. The grid, as mentioned, is the vertical lines. It's also shown right here. The notes thing right here determines how big a note is going to be when you place it in this window. Now, I'm going to be explaining a lot of these shortcuts here, so if you see me magically adding notes here and I'm not explaining what I'm doing, that will come. When I add a note, though, it is going to do whatever this increment is. Usually you'll want it as grid, which duplicates whatever the length of the grid is. So because the grid is 1/16th, I placed a note and it became a 1/16th note. If, for example, I was in triplets, like let's say I had a triplet pattern, as I mentioned, anything that is longer than a 1/16th note will be treated by Rock Band as having a sustain. So if I was using eighth note triplets, I wouldn't want to place eighth note triplet. In fact, let's duplicate this for you so you can see what I'm talking about. I wouldn't want to place a note that's this long because that would be treated as having a very short sustain. So what I could do is set notes to 1/16th, and then if I place it, it will create the correct length 1/16th note. So, sorry, that was way too in-depth for where we are in the tutorial, but it will be helpful to you someday. What else is down here? You don't need to worry about the channel. For Rock Band purposes. The color is something else I will cover right now that I should have done before. One annoying part of loading the custom song template is that it will not automatically load color maps for you. Color maps are things that Reaper, this whole program, uses to determine what color your notes should be, and that's very important for Rock Band because you want to be able to see, for example, that this note is an expert orange note. Like, is this green? No, it's orange. It's secretly orange in disguise. So what you want to do is you can right-click your tab here and go to File, Load Color Map from File, or if you prefer the floating look, there's a menu up here where you can go File, Load Color Map from File, but I'm going to go back to Docked. And then you will browse to the color_maps folder on your computer. Now I'm already there. You will want to find this wherever you have installed Reaper. The plugins that you installed as part of it that we did off-stream will have included this color maps folder, and you'll pick the appropriate one for the instrument you're on. Now right now we're on part guitar. Is my mouse cursor on here? Whatever. So we're going to pick guitar bass. And now, like magic, all of our notes have been colored to the appropriate gems. Oh my god, look at that. Look how pretty. Look at all those colors. It's like we're all on acid. We're on acid together, guys. No, acid's a different audio explorer. So now if I place a note on the appropriate row, it will be the appropriate color. And then this is incredibly useful for maintaining your sanity as you look at stuff. If you import a random MIDI, which we'll cover later in this process, it'll be all kinds of wacky, like dull greens and browns, and it'll be ugly. It will look like a swamp of a MIDI. And we don't want a swamp. We want the aforementioned crazy, trippy colors that are used in Rock Band. The same thing applies to every other part, including keys and vocals. Now, vocals doesn't have dedicated colors like guitar, bass, and drums do, but it's still helpful to load that color map sometimes, if only so that between your different projects, you know that a certain pitch, like an F, a given F note in vocals will always be the same color. We'll cover that when we get to vocals later. We're almost done with some of the important elements of the UI. View here is how it renders this whole thing, basically. The two panels, I'm trying to gesture with my hands, and I realize that my hands will not show up on the screen. The track view up here and the MIDI thing down here, if project synced is selected here, then they will scroll together, and that is 99% of the time what you want. If you see project beats, which I think it defaults to sometimes, they will become desynced, which is a pain in the ass. So make sure you're always in project sync, and again, it can be easy to accidentally change that. So if you see weird things, project sync is what you want. Now, the track editor up here has some buttons too. Most of them are not as important as the ones you'll deal with in the MIDI editor. Up here there is another snap to grid, which you'll use up here just as you'll use down here. And forgive me, I'm not sure I explained the full significance of snap to grid earlier. Whenever you're editing an actual MIDI down here, when you're editing an instrument part, you want it to be on the grid. The line, I think, from the Rock Band Network docs is that rock music is sloppy, but we are not. Our video game must be perfect! And so we always want our notes to line up to this grid that we see. If I had a stream of constant eighth notes, for example, it would look something like this. Not like that. It would look like this. And what we want is for this to go da 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 da, and not some random crap, like if I were to turn off snap to grid and attempt to do it by hand, they would just go wherever the hell. And I'm going to zoom in right now, which I'll tell you more about later. And as you can see, they're not lined up to the grid. This is very bad. We will make fun of you if you try to submit a thing to us and it's not synced up to the grid properly, because it's a very easy thing to do. All you have to do is turn on snap to grid, and then when you place a note, look at that. Look how nice and neat that is. Oh my god. Oh, getting a little hot and bothered just thinking about how nice and neat that is. So there's one of those up here as well for when you're moving tracks around. That will mostly be used when you're trying to synchronize your audio, and that's going to be a very big thing we're going to talk about very shortly. Most of these other things up here, while they can be used, like the metronome or save and load and stuff, I usually prefer just to go to the actual program window for that, but if you like, here's some fancy things to do it. One thing that is worth mentioning is the lock button up here. If you lock the tracks, you can no longer... maybe? I thought that if you locked something, it stopped you from moving it. Clearly, I'm not well prepared for this stream. I think you have to check one of these things in here. But anyway, mess around with that. You can use this to lock things in place so you don't accidentally move them halfway through your project. And this is why I have the chat open, so you guys can ask me questions and tell me how stupid I am when I don't remember how to do something. GameWizard says, is it that you can't edit the notes on the MIDI? That is not the case, because you can still go in and edit and delete things. It's up here for the tracks, but we'll worry about it later. We must move ever forward into the future. So let's actually start talking about the process of creating a custom song. These are the tracks. This is the MIDI edit window. You know most of the basics of actually getting started. The rest we will cover as we go. So you have this template open. I personally prefer to have my song audio track up here at the top, so let's move that up here. What I just did is I clicked on a track with my left mouse button. I dragged it, much like I drag an icon or anything in Windows or Mac OS. Oh, shit. Thank you, Nemo. Nemo points out something that I've neglected to mention at the very beginning of the stream. I am currently using Reaper version 3.78, which we sometimes refer to as 3.x. The official version of Reaper is Reaper 4.x. A lot of people, let's say several people, I don't know if it's the majority of authors, like myself, will use 3.x because this is the version that was live when the majority of Rock Band songs were being authored. It is the version for which the Reaper devs actually did the most work of integrating the Rock Band stuff. Certain features within this program are actually tailored just for Rock Band, which is really cool. Reaper 4.x does work, I believe, with most of the plugins we're going to be using, but just to ensure that everything works, and also because I'm very lazy and I can't be bothered to learn a new version, I use 3.x, and I would recommend that you do when starting out. Again, that's probably terrible advice. Reaper 4.x has some cool stuff in it, I am sure. I don't want to shit-talk it in case they send guys to my house with kneecapping sticks. Nix points out that vocal zoom is horrible in 4.x, and Nemo points out that the Perl scripts that we will sometimes use, which are outside the scope of this tutorial, won't work. So, use 4.x at your own, risk, I guess. We encourage to use 3.x, if only so that when I do things in this tutorial, you have some idea what the hell is going on. Where was I? Song audio. Song audio is our important track. Now, for the purposes of this tutorial, we're going to be using the song that I mentioned earlier, the lovely Echo by the band Dance for the Dying. So let's go ahead and find that. If I go to the Insert menu up here, excuse me, this is the menu from which I can insert new media tracks and also MIDIs, which we'll cover later, into my file. Right now, I just want media file. So I'm going to go to Insert Media File. I'm going to go to... I probably just showed off a bunch of our songs that were in development. I'm sorry. So I'm going to open the MP3. I now have a sexy MP3 that I have put into my song audio track. So let's do that again so that you guys know exactly what I did. You want to make sure that the correct track is highlighted because whatever track is currently selected is the one that the audio will be imported into. These tracks, like part drums, part bass, and part guitar, already have, what's the word I can say here, like bars? These little bars here represent a MIDI item, which is distinct from a media item. Now, media is something like an MP3 that you're going to use to listen to your song. And MIDI are these notes that you're seeing right here, which you're going to be using to create the actual instrument parts. We have some more discussion on Reaper 4.x versus 3.x. Again, I encourage you to check that out in your own extracurricular time. So, once again, we're in the song audio. It's also very important that my time selector cursor, I'm just going to call it the cursor, is at the beginning of the project. And this is another important thing that I have not yet talked about. This line, this vertical line that is red in the MIDI edit window and kind of a dashed grayish thingy up here in the track window, is the current time selection point in Reaper. It says that if I start playing the project, it's going to play from this point. It also says that if I, well, there's a bunch of shit that it affects. For now, let's just say that it starts playing right there. For the purposes of what we're about to do, it's going to insert the media file that I'm inserting at that point. So what I want to do is I want to use a button like this, or perhaps the home key on my keyboard, which I'm going to strike right now. That takes you back to the very beginning of your project. This 1.1, and I'll probably try to find some time to talk about time signatures and stuff as we get further into the tutorial. These are very important, but right now you want to be at the very beginning, 1.1, and that is where you will insert your media file. So let's do that again. Alright, so now that I've imported this, I have a lovely song. You can see the familiar waveforms that you might have seen in other media programs here, and I'm scrolling back and forth, I'm looking at it. One thing that you might notice here at the end is that this template happens to end at about the 3-minute mark. Now, most rock songs are about 3.5 minutes long. That's a very wide generalization. Let's say most popular music is about 3.5 minutes long. So if your song is longer than the 3-minute cutoff here, you are going to want to extend these to the end of your media thing that you've done. Let's do that right now, even though we are going to be moving our media file around a little bit, because this will give me a chance to explain some more of the basic Reaper functions. At any point in Reaper, whether you're in the MIDI edit window or the track edit window, you can use the right mouse button. This is very important. The right mouse button, the one that's not on the left. This one. You want this one. I think, yes, this one. The right one. If you click it and hold it down, it will let you multi-select items. In the track window, that means you'll select multiple tracks, and in the MIDI window, it means you'll select multiple notes. Right now, I'm going to use it for tracks, so I'm right-clicking. Remember, that's the right, the one on the right. It's like the accelerator pedal. and I'm going to drag it down. I'm using my mouse wheel to zoom this thing down, and I'm going to select every single MIDI track that exists in the thing. Now when something is selected in the track window, it becomes dark like this. That's how you know they're selected. And now if I hover my mouse over the end of this item, you're going to see it changes the cursor, right? So here's my regular, like I want to start putting my cursor here. This is the extend track icon. If I left click now, not right click because then I'll lose my selection. If I left click and start dragging, it's going to let me expand or contract this MIDI thing. So as you're seeing down here on the bottom, this is giving me more or less space to work with, basically. This is kind of like if you're in Photoshop or another image editor, giving yourself a larger canvas to work with. So I'm just going to go ahead and drag it over here to the right. We're looking up here at the time signature. This is beats and measures up here at the top, and the actual human-readable, like 3 minutes and 25 seconds. Ah, damn it. I right-clicked. This is like the minutes and seconds, right? So right now we're at 3 minutes and 25 seconds. Let's keep going. And here is the end of the song. Now I can tell that by just seeing, like, here's a waveform, here's a song making noise, and now the song is no longer making noise. So because we're going to move our song up a little bit later, let's give it some buffer. Let's go up to like 4 minutes, I guess. It doesn't matter if your tracks extend a little bit too far, but it is bad if they are too short. So now we are covered in that area. Okay, now we are going to get into the actual first meaty part of this, which is going to be tempo mapping. And I know a lot of you are looking forward to this, and I know a lot of you are dreading it, and I know a lot of those are the same people. There's a lot of stuff to cover in this, so please forgive me if I do it out of order. I don't have anything planned for this except to show you guys in general. So, let's see. I want to start at the beginning, but the beginning is a very difficult thing to define for this. First off, let's make sure we've covered a few more basic things. Before I get done talking about the right-click, let's demonstrate that you can do that down here, too. All of these notes are now selected. If I right-click and drag, all of those notes are selected. Alternately, basic things like left-clicking, we'll select one at a time, but a lot of that you should be familiar with from your time with computers in general. So, this is the fully mixed MP3. This is everything. This is the drums, the vocals, the guitar. This is what you hear when you load this song CD into your CD player. And I'm pretending that it's the year 1999 and that CD players are still a thing. These waveforms that you're seeing right here are a very important thing we're about to talk about. So to make these more visible, we're going to just zoom in on this particular track. And all you have to do there is, just like you do in other Windows applications, hover your cursor over the bottom here, you'll get a resize icon. If you left click and drag, oh, look at that! Look how much easier that is to see. If the overall track window is too small, there's another resize cursor right here that you can use to make it a little bit bigger. When you're doing tempo mapping, as we're about to do, zooming in is very good here, because you want to be able to see each of these peaks, as they're called, in your waveform as clearly as possible. Now, before you start tempo mapping, there's a few other important things to do. Turn off the snap. Because we don't have a tempo map yet, snapping to a particular beginning of a measure or a particular 16th note will not do us any good. We are right now creating the framework that is later going to make snap actually do anything. So turn off snap, and absolutely make sure that it is disabled for the duration of your tempo mapping, or you're going to have problems. What's the next thing I should cover here? So many different avenues of attack. One thing you might want to do at this point is turn off all of your other tracks so you don't have distractions, and there are several ways to do that. The different buttons here at the right side of the left side of the track window mean different things for each track. The M means mute, so if I mute this, the whole track will be grayed out like this, and that means that any noises this track would make are not being made. Now, for example, if I do that with a media track, if I start playing, heard a bunch of noises there. Not all of them are coming from this track, but most of it was the actual sound. If I click M on this track and gray it out, it's no longer playing anything. So M for mute is very helpful. Similar to muting is soloing. If I solo this track, it's kind of the opposite of muting. Everything in the project will no longer make noise except for this one. It is the solo source of all of my noise. ED10 guys, sometimes the drums and other instruments don't exactly match on each measure, and I'm going to cover all of tempo mapping in just a second, I totally promise. In the meantime, other basic Reaper functions. The FX button here is kind of complicated, and a lot of the parts of it are out of the scope of what I want to talk about today, but mostly it applies things that do stuff, I guess, to your current track. For media tracks, it often influences how the audio actually sounds, and for things like our MIDI tracks, it does, wait for it, so cool. It'll do things like the Rock Band Network preview window that give you a real-time rendering of what your notes look like in the game. And if I do one for guitar, you can see the part guitar stuff I have down here. Here is the guitar preview window. And we'll cover these more when we actually get to instrument authoring. But this is an FX window. If you want to turn these off, all you have to do is click that. It will no longer be rendered. Can you guys still hear me okay over that music, by the way? It's very loud in my headphones. Probably because I have it really loud. I'm adjusting the volume over here. That's all I'm doing. And then if I wanted to turn this window back on, I would re-enable this from its red state to its green state. Whenever you click on any FX thing, you can see all of the current FX that are applied over here. Again, I'm jumping way ahead of myself, so we'll cover some of these later. All you need to know for now is that the RBN preview window is this guy, and other ones like Reasynth will let us do other cool things with the tracks. So anyway, we're trying to do tempo mapping. Let's focus on that. What I'm going to do for that is turn off all the effects on all of these tracks, just so that they don't cause noises and bother me. Now, tempo mapping, for those of you who are not familiar, is the process of making the entire file that we're creating here, the MIDI file, sync up to the audio that will be played in the game. This is very important because, as we said before, the Rock Band motto in many ways is that rock music is sloppy, but our game is not. And so we need to make sure that the metadata that we're creating here, this MIDI file, syncs up perfectly to the music in the game so that whenever someone strums their strum bar or hits a drum pad, that they are hitting that note when they expect to within the song, and then it all looks nice. Tempo mapping is not always given the level of attention that it should be, the level of sort of over here respect, I guess. It's very important to have a good tempo map. That's another thing that we will make fun of you for if you do not care about, is tempo mapping. We see a lot of people who are like, oh, it's good enough, whatever. It's only off by 60 milliseconds. That's a lot. We want you to create awesome tempo maps that sync up perfectly to all of our songs. That's right, we demand perfection. Get out! That's obviously a little bit of an exaggeration, but the point is, tempo maps, very important. Please listen carefully. So, there's several elements to a tempo map, and the reason it's called a tempo map is because it addresses the tempo, or the BPM of the song. Now, BPM stands for beats per minute. A song with 120 beats per minute has 2 beats every second, because, 60 seconds in a minute. And that just determines how fast or slow the song is. A song that is 180 BPM is going to be really fast, a lot faster than something that is, for example, 120 BPM. The map element of the tempo map is the insinuation that we will be changing the tempo as we go, because lots of rock music, particularly live music or music from bands that are not... how can I say this? It's the majority of bands, actually, will require tempo mapping, but ones that are like live, that are punk-influenced, things that are generally not like prog rock or dance music or whatever, things that generally have a very consistent tempo will need lots of tempo mapping. So the BPM of your project can be found in a few ways. The current BPM is always visible right here at the bottom of the track window, along with the actual time signature, which is 4/4. Time signatures are probably a little out of the scope of this tutorial. Most of the songs you deal with are going to be in 4/4. Look it up on Google. You can also see the current tempo up here, and this is the one that is the most relevant to us. At the beginning of the file, there is a single BPM thing, and it will always default to 120 because that is the default BPM for all MIDIs in the entire world. Now, unfortunately, most songs in the world are not 120 BPM. So there's a few things we need to do in order to start even creating our tempo map. At the beginning of every Rock Band song, there is a count-in, and you might remember seeing that there is a count-in track down here. Most of the songs you have will not have count-ins unless the drummer decided that he wanted to click some sticks together at the beginning of it, but we like to have count-ins in order to make sure that people can start the song and not trip themselves up. This audio that I'm looking at right here already has a count-in. That's what these peaks, these individual waveform icons are here. If I start playing, that is a count-in that I created myself using the hand clap samples from this song. You can generally just use the cymbal samples that we touched on earlier. And those will do it for most songs that you need to do. We don't really care if you have a super sexy count-in, as long as you have any count-in at all. Now, I bring up the count-in because you want the 4 count-in hits, I guess the 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4 count-in hits, to roughly match the BPM of the rest of the song. So the first thing we're going to do when we're tempo mapping is try to figure out what the entire BPM of the song is on average, because that will give us a good idea of where to start. Position your cursor anywhere near the beginning of the song and start playing. While it is playing, there is a cool feature in Reaper using this thing right here. When you hover over it, it will say tap. I'm going to turn this down a little bit more. If I begin to click this along to the beat of the song, and that is the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 beat of the song, if I left click, you'll notice I'm clicking on every downbeat. It's changing as I get more accurate, but it looks like it's hovering right about 130. It says 129 there, but we're going to assume 130. So that will have actually created an entry wherever you clicked. We don't want the entry here, but this is a very useful tool to just try to find the general BPM. So wherever you clicked, make sure to go find it, and then the best way to delete an individual tempo change is to go up here to the master track, where there will be these blue lines, left click it, and then just hit the delete key on your keyboard. You can also delete it from up here, and I believe you can also right click it to delete it. But the main reason we did that was to change the tempo back here at the very beginning of the project. If I left, I'm sorry, I'm doing things without saying what I'm doing. If I double click this unit up here, it will let me edit this marker, and that includes changing what the BPM is. So my current guess is that this song is 130 BPM on average. I'm going to edit this to say 130. I'm going to hit OK, and then you'll notice that it changes all of my lines here to reflect the BPM that I just put in. Now I'm going to get rid of the count-in that I already have, because that's going to be a little bit confusing. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is where my song actually starts. Don't worry about what I just did. It's magic. I Saw Nothing says, I don't have a tap button. Are you using Reaper 4.x instead of 3.x? If it looks a lot more modern and shiny, you're probably using the new one. Alternately, it might be up here in View somewhere. I honestly don't know which of these is what. It might be Transport. So try hitting View Transport. Let me know if you continue to have problems. So your thing's going to look something more like this, where it begins at the beginning of the song. So let's pretend that you had inserted this at 1.0 like I should have done. I have said that this is going to be 130. Now, the majority of songs, the count-in will go 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and what that means is that for the first measure it'll be 1, 2, and then when we hit the second measure, as denoted up here by the 2.1, that is when you'll go 1, 2, 3, 4. So the ultimate thing that means is that your song itself will be starting on 3.1, the third measure of the song. So what I'm doing right now is left-clicking this and dragging it. I'm changing this. Now again, your song may vary. If it's really fast, you might have to have a longer count-in. If it's really slow, you might have to have a shorter count-in, so that overall the real-life time elapsed is reasonable. But for now, let's assume that you have a decently BPM'd song and that you're starting at 3.1. Now is when the entire bulk of tempo mapping begins to come into play. And over the course of this thing, I've been talking about peaks. Now, peaks refer to the visual waveform here in the track window. Each little thing right here, these suckers, are peaks because they look like mountain peaks. Soft and not punchy noises create these lower peaks down here, right? So this might be, if you listen to that again, each of these two small ones is just a bass hit. The most pronounced peaks will be created by the drum part, and that is almost always what you will be trying to look for to create your tempo map. Let's look later in the song. So that's some drum bits. As you can see, these peaks right here are a lot higher than the short peaks we were working with before. Very tall peaks are very good because obviously you can tell while looking at it that it's a lot higher and easier to tell from its surroundings. And by the way, the reason that this thing is duplicated twice is because it is a stereo MP3 file like most of yours will be, and this is the left channel and this is the right channel. Most of the time in a lot of modern music, the channels will mostly be centered, so they will be about equal on both, but some things will continue to pan audio to the left or right, so it never hurts to look at both the left and the right peaks, that being the upper peaks and the lower peaks, when you're trying to line stuff up as we're about to describe. So I should really get my ass in gear because it's already 40 minutes into this stream. So the very first peak of your song, as you can see right here, that's this one for me. I'm going to zoom in a little bit, and the way I'm going to do that is to grab this and drag it into itself so that it zooms in. You can also hold down Control and do that, though I think right now that's defaulting to... Yeah, that's defaulting to things I don't want it to. So ignore what I just said for Control. The easiest way that I find to zoom is to use the handle that I just did right here. Someone can probably chime into chat and tell me what the shortcut is to horizontally scroll using your keyboard and mouse. But anyway, scroll in a lot. The more you can scroll in to about this level, that is the better off you're going to be. The very first peak of my song is this one right here, this little waveform. I want the top of that peak, or the bottom of the peak, however you want to define it, I want that to be right here on this little line, okay? Because that is the very beginning of the playable part of our song after our count-in. And speaking of which, if you change the BPM, your count-in is also going to be off. You can fix that by dragging these samples with snap turned on, the one time you want to use snap at this point in the process, back to the appropriate things. And so now that I've done that, I'm just left-clicking and dragging, by the way, no magic here. If I play the song from the beginning, I now have a sexy count-in. Okay, so anyway, the peak here is at 3.1. This is the easy one. This is the very easy part of tempo mapping, is to line up your song at the beginning. Now comes the part that everyone hates. You will have to go over every peak in your song, excuse me, not every peak, every measure of your song, which is much easier than every peak, and line them up to the grid in the way you want. Now, the song that I'm using as an example here is kind of unfair because the entire thing is a steady 130 BPM, but that's an important lesson because often modern bands will record, they will record to a metronome or a click track, as some artists like to call it, which will mean that on average their entire song is one static BPM. And when I say on average, I mean very, very, very close to that. If they still swing around the BPM that they're trying to hit and don't actually hit it, you will still need to tempo map. But I'm lucky in that this band recorded to a click track, and even if I just go over here later, you can see, like, I'm now minutes into the song, and you can see that things still mostly line up to the track. So what that tells me actually is that my very initial one is not properly lined up. So maybe I need to drag this a little bit. The entire process of tempo mapping is going to be using these peaks that we've been talking about in order to determine what the BPM is for every measure of the song. You don't want to have to go within an individual measure. You only change the BPM once per measure, in order so that the notes in the game sync up to the music appropriately. I'm probably explaining that very poorly. It's actually a pretty intuitive concept when you're in there working with it. So let's go ahead and do that. Now, let's use this as an example. Because I messed up this placement a little bit, let's pretend that I leave that there. I want to set the first tempo map entry of my song at the next measure. So remember, every measure is the number up here. This is measure 3, beat 1. This is measure 3, beat 2, and so on. There's 4 beats to each measure because I'm in 4/4 time. And so the next measure is here at 4. Now if I play my song, the bass part that is playing here at the beginning, along with the hand claps, does not sync up to the downbeat, is the best way to put it, the downbeat of the song. It's not like it hits the 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's hitting 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And because of that, I don't have a peak. I don't have a peak to look at here at 4.1. So what I'm going to do for now is go a little bit ahead in time to the place where I do have a peak, which is going to be the next measure. This is 4.1. Let's look at 5.1. I'm playing this over again so you can hear it a few times. At this point, the bass does actually have a note here. So let's use this one as an example because it is a suboptimal example. If I click here, and this is going to vary from person to person where they like to place their mouse within the peak. Let's assume that right here is a good place to call the start of the peak. I have placed my cursor here, which is not quite on 5.1. If I zoom in, this is really more zoomed than you would ever want to be. But for the purposes of showing you, here's where the game thinks 5.1 is, and here is where I have put my cursor. So I've stuck my cursor there, and now I'm going to do the entire magic of tempo mapping, which is to hit the Q key on my keyboard. I'm going to hit it, and it's going to do a bunch of things on the back end that I don't get to see. Basically what it's doing is it's taking your input of where the peak is, where the downbeat of the next measure is, and creating the BPM entry of the previous measure based on where you put that. Now that's a little bit more jargony than it needs to be, But what that means is we started at 5.1, if you remember, and now it's taken us back here to 4.1. It has created the tempo map for this measure, 4.1, in such a way that these beats should now be a little bit more synced up. Now, unfortunately, they're not, because I messed up some of this stuff earlier, but we'll get closer to it as we go. If you saw something that was this far off the initial peak, you would want to go back and fix it. And actually, let's do that as an example of how to do it right. Control-Z, undo, works in this application just like in every other application you've ever used in your entire life. So right now I'm going to undo. It's going to undo the things I just did. And I'm going to take this as an example that I did it wrong at the very beginning. That means I placed my song incorrectly at 3.1, the beginning of the audio. Now, on top of using the Q key to create individual tempo maps, you can drag this kind of stuff and tweak it however you want. Because we're still here at the beginning of the file, and I haven't created any tempo maps yet, I can go ahead and drag it however I want. And the downbeats, like 4.1, 3.1, etc., are not the only ones that matter. The ones inside the measure are also very important. I can tell that these peaks that are pretty high and easily noticeable should clearly be right here. You know, they should be moved a little bit. So because I haven't created any tempo maps, I can just do this. And now it looks a lot better. Move it around a little bit more. And you'll see that because I lucked out and this song has a constant BPM, that also fixes the ones later on. Now, you can only drag it like this at the very beginning of your song, because if you do it later, you'll mess up all your tempo maps, but it's a very important starting point to get the rest of your song correct. And now as it goes, you can see that these peaks are lining up to the individual quarter note beats. Now again, this song has a perfectly matched BPM, but a lot of the songs you're going to work with are not going to do that. So let's walk through the tempo map process as you would on a regular song. So here I am at 4.1. This one, as we discussed earlier, does not have a pronounced peak. Let's go to 5.1. This one's also not a great example, not a super pronounced peak. So here I am where the drums have kicked in, and I'm at 6.1. Each of these is either a tom or a kick drum, depending on what beat you're on. And I want this thing right here, this peak, to line up exactly to the line that I have in my grid. As you can see right here, the gray line is already lining up with the peak. So if it wasn't, I would then line up my cursor right here, and I would click Q. And now you can see, because the BPM is already mostly correct, it's only changing it a tiny bit from 130 to 130.083. But if your song is a little more rambunctious, it's going to change it by a little bit more than that. So after I do that, I would go to the next measure, 7.1. I would click on the peak. I would do the same thing, Q. Then I'd go up to 8.1. Now you'll notice this one doesn't have a peak right there. That's because in this song, no downbeat hit happens there. But it does it in 9.1. So you have a few options here. If it only goes one measure without having a downbeat on the, without having a peak on the downbeat you need, you can go ahead a measure like I just did to 9 and do it there. That will still create it for just the previous measure, which might mean that you have like a tiny bit off sync, but that will generally be with an acceptable tolerance for a tempo map. Alternately, if you really need to fix the tempo map for just that part, you can go in manually, and I don't recommend doing this, you can go in manually to each of these tempo markers and change the tempo yourself. What did I just do? I'm creating them. Anyway, do it by doing this. Double-click the ones up here. This is what it thinks the BPM should be for that. Now let's say, again, I'm going to just create a random one here like I shouldn't do, but because I did that messed up thing, it's going to have messed up. What did it mess up? It didn't mess up enough. This song is so well BPM'd that I can't mess it up even if I want to. Okay, here we go. So I clearly messed this one up. Now my notes are no longer falling on the lines that they should. This is the first beat, the second and third and fourth beats. And 9.1 is actually over here. So I want this note to be back here, and what I can do if I want to change that manually is change this point. Now, I don't think if I change it from here it'll do anything. No. Let's say I'm just messing around with this and I made it 150. Watch how the lines change when I change the BPM. That made the lines spread out a little bit more because the BPM is slower and therefore each beat takes more time, giving it more horizontal space on the UI. So clearly that was the right direction. So now if I needed to go a little bit lower, I could say, what if it was 140? That's much closer to where I want it to be, but not quite. And since I happen to know this song is in 130, I can clearly set it to what it's supposed to be, and we're fixed. But the main use for this is if you don't have a measure with a downbeat, like let's say you have a long section that's just vocals or something and has no easy way to tell what the downbeat of that measure is, you can manually change these BPMs until it syncs up more or less correctly, and then later, when you get back to a point that does have these, again, bad example here, here's one without a downbeat, I can click on the downbeat and I can say sync up. That's not it. Actually, I messed up because I think I still have, yeah, the BPM here is still wrong, so let's delete this guy. Okay, now the example that I'm trying to make will actually make sense. So now if I go up here to 11.1, I have this and I can hit Q and it'll make sense. Okay, so that's the basics of tempo mapping. The really tedious part that makes everyone hate tempo mapping is that you have to do this for the entire song. If your song is not something that has a constant BPM, which odds are that it doesn't, every single measure in the song is going to involve you finding X.1, clicking on it, and making the correct thing there. And dealing with cases like this where there's no downbeat peak on your X.1. So I'd go to the next one, it's right here, I'd click on it, I'd adjust until I'm at the right spot, I'd click Q, it makes a tempo map. I'd go forward to the next one. There's not one here, so I'd keep going forward. Here's one, I would click here, here's my tempo map. And now as you can see, because I'm doing that, it's making all of my peaks within each measure sync up correctly, and that is what makes it possible to play this in-game without it being a messy piece of crap. Now, it sounds like doing it for every measure in the song is horrible, and if I start scrolling here, my god, it does look intimidating, doesn't it? But you'll notice that each individual measure that I'm doing this for, like let's go 16, not there, 17, click, Q, scroll forward, 18 doesn't have one, 19, click, Q. Each of these things is taking me a few seconds, just 1 or 2 seconds, you know? And even though there are 117 measures in my song, if each of those takes me like 3 to 5 seconds to do that measure, that whole thing is only going to take a few minutes. Tempo mapping is actually one of the least time-consuming things for most songs of a decent length once you're used to it. I'm sure some people will disagree with me on that. Someone mentioned earlier that they're sick of demos like this that the beat is really prominent in, so I'm going to take this opportunity to reveal an unannounced song for the future of customs creators. The song I'm about to reveal is going to be coming out on October 11 of the year of our Lord 2013. I've created a new project tab in Reaper, which you can do from File, New Project tab. Let's take a look at the project. I don't have one open, so no. Zach and Sarah by Ben Folds. This is a song which has a lot of stuff going on in its MP3. That's not what I wanted to do. Look at this. Let's compare this one to the one that I was just looking at. This one is nice and neat and very easy to tell where the peaks are. This one, not so much. So when you're actually doing something, you're going to be looking at something that looks a lot more like this. Now, for this song, I did the exact same thing that I laid out previously, which is I created a count in. Now, because this song is really fast, and someone noticed some of my other unannounced songs. I know, I didn't prepare my secrecy enough for this, so you get to know all the songs I'm working on right now. Congratulations. Because this song is really fast, it's 184 BPM-ish at the start, and I found that by doing the tap tempo thing that I showed you earlier. Because it's really fast, I didn't do 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, and start on 3, because that wouldn't have given the player enough time. I gave them one measure of blank, and then Now you'll notice for these first few measures there are no tempo events. That is not at all to suggest that this song is completely constant tempo. It's very close. Ben Folds clearly recorded to a click track for this song, but it varies in a few places. So I created the very first peak here on 4.1, which was the beginning of my song, and then I basically just eyeballed it, right? I kept going, and here at 8 you can see another big peak that lines up. That means that in between is good enough. And you can see some other peaks here that will reinforce that idea. If I keep scrolling forward, 12.1 looks good too. Nice strong downbeat peak right there, lines up. Now eventually, you can see here that it's a little bit off sync. This is generally within the acceptable tolerance for your tempo map. Some people will disagree with me that they want really anally perfect tempo maps. But if you see these sub peaks here, still lining up to quarter notes. And again, now that this waveform is a lot harder to read than some of the other ones, it's not quite as clear as it was with this awesome one over here, right? But it is still very possible, especially if I zoom in a little bit more, to say, okay, this big hit right here from where it used to be a little softer and is now a little taller, this is the big kick, pedal, and cymbal hit. And that's where my measure should begin. Now, I believe right around here, yeah. So had I left this with no tempo changes, it would have started to get a little bit off sync. And so that's what the whole point of tempo mapping is. Excuse me. So at some point, I had gone in here, I had clicked on this particular peak being a little more pronounced on the right channel than on the left channel, and I had hit Q, and it created this tempo map. And that's all I did. Now later in the song, I don't even need it as much because it's a constant BPM again. But then I believe once or twice later I would adjust it a little bit. Now, this is an imperfect process. Tempo mapping in a perfect world is like every measure is exactly like hit Q and it created a tempo map and it's great, or the entire song is a tempo map. Sometimes the song is mostly a single tempo map. In this particular example, Ben Folds recorded to a click track, but he drifted a few times. So I used these where I had to in order to make the in-game notes as well synced as I could. Now let's go back to echo, because this song is really easy to tell what's going on in. Tempo mapping goes the entire length of the song, and then if you've done it right, at the very end of your song, you should still have your peaks line up. Now this song clearly hasn't been done correctly, so let's open the actual finished project for it. If you've done your tempo map, and this is like the cooking show part of our show, where I have the I have everything done ahead of time, and I can show you my lovely quiche that has been created off screen. Why do I keep trying to double click that? Here at the very end of your song, the peaks should be just as lined up as they were at the beginning. When you have a completed tempo map, every peak that you see in your song will be lined up to a quarter note somewhere. I mean, unless you're doing some weird prog song, which you might be. I encourage everyone watching this to go mess around with tempo maps on their own. I'd like to think that the process, once you get the basic grips of it, is fairly intuitive. You want the peaks to line up. That's it. You want the graphical things here to line up with the graphical things here. You don't need a fantastic ear for sound. You don't need a crazy amount of rhythm, natural rhythm, to be able to do it. You just need these things to line up to these things. If you can do that, you can tempo map. And I will be fielding any questions about that now, / at the end of the stream, / in follow-up streams. So if I stop streaming, you go mess with this, and you can't do it, please feel free to visit, once again, our fancy customs creators. I'm going to stop trying to do that. This guy, go to this website and ask us for help. We will help you. All right, so just in the interest of getting more stuff into my 2 hours here, because I've already used half my time, let's move on from tempo mapping to something else. If I have a song sitting here that has a complete tempo map, as this one does, let's go back to our unfinished quiche. Why did I pick quiche? I don't want to eat quiche. I'm going to delete all of the tempo marker things that I did for this one. Can I do it like this? I can't. I don't remember how to delete all these. Whatever. Let's do it like this. So this song I can create a tempo map for by just saying 130. So we'll do that. After you have your tempo map, the world is your oyster. You can pick any instrument in the song to author, and it really doesn't matter at this point in the process what order you do it in. None of the instruments will have a particularly huge impact on the other instruments, except for things like unison phrases, which will be authored at the very end of your song. Nemo points out that if you're doing a dream theater song, your tempo mapping might be a little more tricky. So let's see. I'm going to poll the chat. What instrument would you guys like me to cover? Drums, bass, guitar, and normal keys are all about the same. They will involve the same principles of me discussing it. Vocals is a lot more complicated, and so are pro keys. So I'd like to do either drums, bass, guitar, or regular keys first. Which of those for this song do you think we should cover? Thesmopty says, I vote drums. Thank you, Thesmopty. You go, Glen Coco. That is what we're going to do. So we'll cover harmonies. S for, I promise. So when I'm editing an actual MIDI track, I want to double-click on that track up here. I probably want to zoom out quite a bit. And by double-clicking this, it opens the appropriate track down here in the MIDI editor. Now that I'm working with the MIDI and not the actual song audio, I can do this to get it a little less intrusive, and then I can do this to be able to see more of my MIDI editor at a time. Now, I had explained this before, but you can load the color map for this. Let's do that again really quick. Find the drums one, click open, and then this will make sure that all of your drums notes are correct to the colors of the thing. Now, if you've never used Reaper to author customs before, it's going to be a little strange. You're used to notes looking like this. You're used to seeing the kick pedal as an orange line that encompasses the entire thing, and you're used to each pad having gems in these vertical rows. Now we're working with horizontal rows. For the first few hours of working with custom songs, it'll be a little bit confusing, but then after you get more used to it, how can I say this? It's like second nature when you see charts like this. Back in the day when the website Score Hero existed, there were chart renderers that would create things on horizontal lines like this, but they would have everything flipped, and people from Harmonix would come and say, like, man, you guys have that backwards, because I look at it and it looks like this. So as I discussed before, to get this fancy preview window that I had up here, you need to enable your FX. That is done by clicking this little guy here until it turns green. And now I have this. It is turned on. It will now display in real time anything that I put in here. So at this point, pretty much the bulk of authoring is listening to the song and laying down the notes that you hear. Let's listen to the beginning of Echo by Dance for the Dying. So the drums start here at measure 6. If you wanted, you could author the hand claps that you heard to drums. That would be your personal call as an author. When I released this song for Rock Band Network, I chose to have them as actual percussion events on vocals, you know, where the little circles come up on the vocals track, instead of authoring them to drums. But regardless, I would want to start authoring something for this measure. Now, for drums in particular, there are several ways to tackle the song. Some people prefer to go through the entire song, authoring just the kick drum and the snare drum, because those have the most pronounced noises, and then going back through and adding literally everything else in another pass. Let's take another listen. Turn this up a little bit so you guys can hear it. But actually, it looks like it's pretty loud, so... Ed Tanguy points out that as a non-drummer, it's often hard to hear if it's a tom or a kick pedal. Unfortunately, that is one of the things where I have to say it just comes with experience. If you listen to a lot of rock music with an ear for, is that a kick pedal or a tom, it'll start to become a little more clear. Now that said, even if you've done a lot of this, a lot of the time you just can't tell, and you'll have to take your best guess. And that is why we have a playtesting process before we release any of our songs for the fancy customscreators.com project. If I'm listening to this measure, there are clearly kick pedal and tom noises in there. Now this song is basically a fill, so it's actually a pretty good example of how to start. The kick drum is the orange note that you lay down here. It is orange, except you don't want it to be that long. To place a note in the MIDI editor, all you have to do is double click. I've been doing that a lot through this tutorial, and I probably should have explained it earlier. So if I thought that this measure had quarter note bass pedal hits, I would lay it down like this, and it would show up in my preview window. Now let's listen in and try to figure out where the kick pedals actually are. By the way, you're not seeing this. I'm pressing the space bar on my keyboard to quickly play and pause the song. If you want to just use your mouse, you can do it up here, but I highly encourage the use of the space bar because it lets you just start and stop wherever you need to. Now, what this drummer is doing is starting the measure on a big hit with a snare drum. I can hear snare in there, so I'm going to go ahead and lay down a red note to help give myself my bearings. Now it happens that that hit is actually a flam, where the drummer hits the snare drum with both of their hands, but we'll cover that in a second. So it goes snare, kick, kick, snare, kick, kick, other note, kick, kick, and that's pretty much the whole measure. Let's listen to that again so you can get an idea of what I'm talking about. Jerry says that the song is turned down. I am sorry. When we're actually listening to the song, it's very important for it to be loud. Thanks for catching that. So anyway, we have snare, kick, kick. Another note that happens to be a tom, so we'll put blue here, even though it's going to be a symbol, just as a placeholder, and then 2 more kicks. And that right there is authoring. I have just laid down the notes that you will see in-game. Now, from what I'm hearing right now, I honestly don't even remember what the actual chart for this song is I heard flam, kick, kick, toms, kick, kick, toms. And this is actually tricky. Measure and beat 6.4 here. And another very important thing is you can see where you are in the song at this time display right here. So if I'm at the beginning of the thing on the downbeat, it'll be 6.1. If I'm at the 4th quarter note of the measure, it'll be 6.4. So right now, this is actually kind of tricky. This note right here, is it a kick or a tom? And that's honestly kind of tricky. When I had this song, I had all of the separated master stems that I don't have right here. I had the multi-tracks. But because most of the time you're going to be authoring from an MP3, it's kind of tricky. You have to actually figure out what it is just using your ear. So I think it sounds like flam, kick, kick, tom, kick, kick, floor, tom. So if I were to author this, I would put the flam here, which is red and yellow at the same time. I would put a double tom hit here, which I'm using yellow and blue toms, and let's say that it's a double tom. I actually don't remember if it's a double tom. It might just be floor tom. I would do this. And now you can see here that they're being rendered as symbols in this Pro Drums view. And if I wanted to toggle this between Pro Drums and regular drums, I would just click the mode thing here, but let's keep it going to Pro Drums because that's very useful. To make these Pro Drums notes with toms instead of symbols, I would go up here to the Pro lines, and I would put the appropriate colors above the appropriate notes. This is a flam, so it treats the yellow hit, which is the right-hand snare drum hit, as if it were a tom. So I'd put a yellow there, and if I place the note on the wrong pitch like this, I can left-click and drag to move it around. Very handy. So then I'd want to do the same thing for my double tom hit here, and I'd want to do it again over here. And now if I play through my preview window, that is a drum fill. Now again, I apologize offhand if I'm getting this wrong. I honestly don't remember if that's a floor tom or not. As you guys can tell, a big part of authoring is listening to things like a drum fill over and over again until you get it right. This is the thing that turns a lot of people off of customs authoring, which is a shame. You don't have to go over each measure as many times as I just did, usually. You can just do that. And as we get into the rest of the track here, as people are talking about in the chat, copy and paste will be your friend. You will be able to do things like simple hi-hat sections on the drums over and over again. I should be paying more attention to the chat. My cat's trying to get on my lap. Come here, sweetie. Ugh. Cat stream. Johnny Mac 949 says, do the drum tabs that are on the internet help? Seems like I'm going to start that way, as I don't think I can hear the difference. I would like to warn everyone that is listening that while tabs and sheet music and stuff can be very useful, they can also be very treacherous. A lot of the times people assume that a song is always being done consistently throughout the song, like that a given fill, like this one for example, is always going to use that pattern throughout the entire song. And in Rock Band, we care very much about the times that it differs. So if you do use sheet music or tabs, that's a fine starting point, but be sure to carefully listen through your song on every track that you've laid down using tabs and make any changes that are not, if the song itself differs from what the tab says it is, always use what you can actually hear and not the tab. And that's what Nix is saying in the chat as well. So speaking of copy-paste, let's go on from this measure. Right here on the upbeat of 6.4.5, we have an open hi-hat. So for the sake of argument, let's assume that this is just a single floor tom, which renders it like this. Now let's also assume that you're the kind of person who likes to author their open hi-hat notes on blue and not yellow, and that's often just a judgment call on your part. Here's a measure of not fill. Now, for the sake of this example, I'm going to do what I said that many people do and lay down the kick notes and the snare notes before doing anything else. So it's kick, kick, snare. And lots of rock music has snare on the 2 and the 4 beat, so if you're in doubt and you can't tell if something's a snare or not on those beats, it probably is. So we got kick, kick, snare, kick, kick, snare. And then this song also happens to have an upbeat kick right here. So that gives us a kick and snare pattern like this. And yes, as Nemo has answered in the chat, you can put pro markers in here without doing any notes below it, but nothing will happen. And remember earlier I discussed that you can right-click and drag to select multiple notes. If I wanted to get rid of these notes temporarily, I could show you. Nothing will be rendered. And yes, Control-Z, as I just did to restore these notes, is your friend. So here's the kicks and snares for this measure. Now, drums are not just kick and snare, they are also cymbals and toms. What else is going on in this measure? Kinda hard to tell, isn't it? Let's listen again. Now, you'll notice there that I continue listening to the track beyond just the measure that I'm trying to author right now, and that's because, particularly when you're doing drums, it can be very, very helpful to listen to the hi-hat pattern as it continues, in case that the rest of the song is softer at some point other than the one you're looking at, and you can extrapolate what the hats should be from there. So like in this measure, I'm honestly not sure whether the hats are on 1, 2, 3, 4, or whether they're on the eighth notes of 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. But right here at the beginning of the next measure, right here you can hear 2 pretty clear hat hits at the 1 and the upbeat. So from that I would extrapolate that there are in fact 8th note hi-hat hits happening. And if I did that, I would double-click, I would create things like this, and that would give us a very basic drum beat of this. And now, if you're watching the preview window up here, you're basically looking at a Rock Band drum thing that you could play along to with your Air drumsticks. Now this one's very tricky because some of the places where I currently have upbeat hats authored, I can't really hear them in this mix. So this might well be one of those annoying cases where a drummer decides to randomly put 8th note hats in where the bulk of the song is just quarter note hats. So in fact the song might look something like this. Cases like this are very difficult when authoring. As a rule, I personally like to err on the side of a pattern being simpler. I prefer not to try to author notes that aren't clear to hear in the mix. Some other people will just say, well, if it's 8th notes, I'm going to go ahead and author it as 8th notes the whole time. And honestly, in mixes where you can't tell, it's not a big deal if you're not 100% right. Pikmin Guts asks if I'm going to talk about drum mix events. I am going to. I'm going to try to cover the actual fun guts of the authoring first. Sideshone says, all of the claps are being authored to vocals and not snare. In the way that I did this song, I chose to author them to the vocals percussion. If you wanted to, you could author them to the drums track. But given that there is an actual snare drum hit here, I think that it would clutter the drum track way too much to add them to the drum track, and in fact I would, like, if someone tried to run that through me by playtest and said, like, hey, I have these hand claps in here, I would be, no, stupid, put them in vocals. And Kiera basically says the same thing. You should put claps, tambourine, cowbell, and other handheld percussion as vocal percussion. I agree, Esper. Thank you. Okay, so for now, let's go ahead and ignore that this exists. You wouldn't do that in real life. Let's assume that the entire song is quarter note hats like this. Now this is where copy and paste is your friend, if only as a starting point. I can take the pattern I just made and put it into the next measure. Now I happen to know that the snares and kicks don't match up exactly, so I'm not going to copy and paste those. Okay, so what's going on in this measure? I am not hearing any kicks in this first window. What? Oh god, what's happening? Anyway, in this window right here, I am not hearing any kicks. The first kicks I hear are here at 8.3. And it looks like this. Satan's Best Buddy asks, do I just listen to the song as is and don't try adjusting the pitch, bass, whatever to try to make things easier to hear? That is a very valuable resource when you are authoring customs. If you are trying to pick out hats, like I just was, for instance, from the drum track, I might want to go into the audio manipulation part of the DAW that I'm using, which is REAPER, and say, just give me the high frequencies. Now, that's kind of beyond the scope of what I wanted to talk about today. I might do like a 30-second thing on it here really quick. But do be aware, as you are beginning your customs journey, that it is possible to manipulate the audio file itself to try to pull out individual frequencies to be better understood. Now, here's your little advanced sidebar. You can do that in Reaper with all of its built-in FX. What's one that I would do for this? Like, if I just wanted to change the EQ, I could do this FX chain. And I could say, like, I would use Reaper for this, I think. Please bear with me, I'm not nearly as good at EQ manipulation and stuff as many of the people watching are. So, let's say I wanted to pull up the low end, and I can see what things I'm modifying. I should be able to, yeah, by doing... Obviously that sounds very different. If I turn it off, I have the normal one. And now it's pulling up the low end like a lot. That's more than you would probably want to pull it up, but anyway, you get the idea. Is that you can change this to pull out particular sounds if you're having trouble hearing something. That is outside of the scope of this tutorial, so I will leave that to you as homework to find out how to do it. It's okay, Satan's Best Buddy. I still love you. And Twisted Eye points out that I do have the masters, but doing it for the sample this way would be better learning. Yeah, so I'm torn, and I apologize to be wishy-washy on this. While you're just starting out, it is a very good idea, as Trojan Nemo points out up here, to try to do it based on the full mix. That is the mix that all of your players are going to be hearing when they actually play the game in Rock Band, and ultimately the sounds that come out strongly in the full mix are more important than the individual nitty-gritty. There are times when sometimes authoring it as you hear it instead of what's actually being played is better. And some people like hate that idea. They're like, oh my god, that's blasphemy against the original artist. There's clearly a hi-hat there. It's ruining the track to not put it there. Use your judgment. Do whatever would be most fun and most sensible to the people playing the song. That's like the golden rule of authoring. So I don't want to get bogged down too much in drums. That is the very basics of drums authoring. I would lay down the kicks and the snares. I would copy and paste those as I needed to do. Let's go ahead a little bit here. Yeah, I'll just do a quick little manual authoring set here. And as you can see, I'm listening, I'm placing the notes. This is a fill, I would worry about that later. And now that I've seen that this pattern right here looks very similar to this previous pattern, I could potentially start copying and pasting these, but for right now, let's just keep going. And as you can see, once you get used to it, it's pretty quick. You'd go through, you'd add some kicks, you'd add some snares. As I need to, I might go back and quote-unquote scrub, which is to listen to the same section over and over again. Scrub a section to try and find out what's going on. But for stuff like this, I can just lay it down as I go. I can check it out later. That's authoring. Again, for drums, you can either take your pick, you can go through the entire song doing just kicks and snares and then go back and add toms and cymbals, or you can do everything measure by measure or section by section. Frequently, just to make sure that I'm not going crazy, I will go back over the last 4 or 8 measures that I did for kicks and snares and lay down my cymbals and toms at the time. What are people saying in chat? Yeah. You guys got a handle on it. So that's drums. At their core, guitar, bass, and 5-lane keys use many of the same concepts. Let's go take a look at guitar for this song. Actually, bass is way better, because this song's bass is awesome. So let's go back to the beginning here. Now you'll notice I have to change my zoom, because the zoom is tied to each track individually. I will also need to reload my color map to be bass. By the way, if you're wondering, the reason that these notes exist in the lower difficulties is that the compiler used to create Rock Band Network and custom songs will give you like errors if your lower difficulties do not have notes in them. So these dummy notes, if you just want to test your song on expert, or if you're lazy and you don't ever want to author hard, medium, and easy, you totally should, will let you render the song without having those difficulties in place. But anyway, you can ignore them for now. So here's bass. Freaking sweet bass part, right? I'm going to enable the preview window for this guy, which is very much the same as drums, except that it renders it as 5-lane, like it should. And again, if you ever change it by mistake, you can change what it shows up here in the mode by clicking this. Like here's pro drums, here's standard drums, keys, but for now we want guitar and bass. So unlike drums, guitar, bass, and keys have some creativity involved. I mean, not that drums doesn't, but the point of guitar, bass, and keys is that you are creating the chart yourself. You are hearing the relative pitches that are being played on the stringed instrument or the keyboard, and you are saying, this note is higher than the previous note, therefore it should be a higher gem on the fretboard, like if the previous one was a green, it should be a red. And you're going through the whole song and creating patterns that make sense and are fun to play. And I emphasize the later part so you don't get Guitar Hero 3 charts that are full of 3-note chords of terribleness. So here's this first measure. It's usually the best idea is just to start laying notes down and then edit them as you go. Don't worry too much about getting the entire pattern correct in your head, like before you start. Just start laying some notes down and see how it works. So let's see, I have 4 ascending notes here. Da, 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 da. So let's start on red. I happen to know that this is an 8th note beat because 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Well, not 4. 1 and 2 and 3 and 1. So, da 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 da. That would look something like this. And then my other one is on the upbeat of 4, so it would go 1 and 2. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, which in this case is a higher note, so it would be. And here the bassist does a slide down from this note to the next note. And here's one of the things that many people disagree on. Lots of people love to chart lots of hammer-ons and pull-offs to do slides. I personally prefer to author them as sustains most of the time. Just for the sake of this tutorial not taking forever, let's make this one a sustain. Now the next note is right here at 4.1.5. So that would mean the sustain would go up to here. Oh my god, I'm trying to grab the edge of the note to extend it. Now, why is it that long? The Rock Band Network docs that we use as the basis for all of our customs state that all sustains should end about a 16th note before the next note, and that's to make sure that they look nice and pretty in-game. And now I can continue the pattern. So we've got slide. And this one goes and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So now the trick is I want to find out where my relative pitches are in here. So this note right here. Now what am I doing? I am putting my cursor here on 4.1.5. And by cursor I mean my mouse cursor for once. I'm clicking on it. I'm hitting space. And now it's playing the same thing over and over again. If I continue to click here, I can hear that pitch. And so what I'm hearing is a duh. I can't go that low here. Ma. Ma. And so how does that pitch compare to these pitches? Let's go ahead and check out each of these pitches individually. Ba, 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 ba. Now, if it sounds like I'm doing crazy music theory stuff here by like, I don't know, being good at pitches or something, I kind of am. But if you've played a lot of Rock Band or Guitar Hero, that tends to be able to give you an edge over like nothing. You know, even if you don't have a robust background in music theory or being able to pick out pitches, if you've played guitar parts before, it's generally pretty intuitive to say should be here's a note, here's a higher note, here's a higher note, here's a higher note, and then it goes down. Now even if we don't know what pitches these are, we can tell that this sequence right here, da-da, goes from a lower note to a higher note. So, because I just compared all the notes, here's this guy again. is this note that I'm hearing higher or lower than this one? Na, 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 na. So because it's lower, as an initial starting off point, right, I could say it's a green. Da, 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 da. So how about this note right here? Is this note the same, perhaps, as one of the notes we already used? It is not. So if I go ahead and try to figure out the relative pitch of these notes once more, we have na, 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 da, and then where's this guy? Ma, ma. So it doesn't really correlate precisely to these ones we have over here. So let's just go ahead and try to create a chart and then see how it plays. Now, does this make any sense? So again, it's not super important to have all of your relative pitches across different measures be exactly the same, but let's check this one out just in case. This note is a fairly high bass note. Na na. So it's not as high as this one, but it's higher than this one. And so in this kind of situation, we have more than 5 notes being played, so the 5 notes are not going to correlate exactly to green, red, yellow, blue, and orange. So in this case, it looks like this pattern will be all right. And you'll notice that here, it's the exact same pattern as before. So what I'm going to do is copy and paste these bad boys using Control-C and Control-V, just like any other Windows application. Now there's a slight change here. If we listen to this bit to the previous part, this one has a clear attack on the note at 4.4.5. Da 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 da. And if we listen here, this is sliding upwards. So one thing I might want to consider doing here is making this blue gem a hopo, a hammer-on or pull-off. And to do that in Reaper, you have 2 lanes here above the expert notes that say force hopo on and force hopo off. Those do exactly what you would think. Just like pro toms that we covered a little earlier, I would put a note right here that would say this note is now a hammer-on. And as you can see, it renders it as a hammer-on. Again, I don't want to get too bogged down in this, so that's probably all I'm going to cover for bass right now. And guitar works the same way, except with more chords. I probably will be doing some follow-up streams at the rate that I'm going, so perhaps we will do an in-depth investigation into guitar and bass later on. That's bass. Alright, so now in the last half hour that we have before I'm going to stop streaming and hang out with my wife, who doesn't want me talking to nerds on the internet all day, we're going to talk about vocals. Now, vocals are kind of the bane of a lot of people's existence. Many people say, I would do customs, but vocals are such a pain in the ass. So hopefully, with the last half hour we have here, I can ameliorate some of your fears about vocals. Now let's turn off our preview windows and go down to the vocals track. Now, as I said before, part vocals is used for solo vocals. The notes you lay down in part vocals will be the entirety of the solo vocals thing. And harm 1, harm 2, and harm 3 will be each of the different colored bars in harmonies. For the purpose of this tutorial, we're going to talk about harmonies, but we're going to do everything in part vocals. Now, vocals is different than the instrument tracks in that instead of using 1/16th notes, you'll be using 1/64th notes. Now, that is such a small increment of time that you can't even see the individual lines at this zoom level. So what I'm going to do is grab this guy, drag it in until I'm able to see those. Each of these lines is 1/164th note. And just so you get an idea of how long that is, I'm going to create a time selection that is the duration of a 64th note, and I'm going to tell it to play it over and over. It's so short that it's just generating a tone. It's very short. Now that said, 1/64th is actually quite long in the realm of vocals. Harmonics, the official harmonics charts don't even use a grid at all. They just say the note starts here and it ends here. I don't care if that's on a note or not. But that is way too much precision for pretty much anything you'll ever want to do. As such, we recommend that everybody use the 1/64th grid to do authoring, because otherwise you will tear your hair out by its roots and you will hate life and you will kill babies. So these are part of the template. I'm going to delete those for now. Let's go to where the lovely vocalist MC Wolf actually has vocals. Here's another keyboard shortcut for you. If you're in either view, you can hold the Alt key on your keyboard and hit left and right to jump forward by large increments at a time. So here's a vocal part. Now, unfortunately, it's a mixed song, so the vocals are still in here intertwined with everything else. Ed Tan Guy says, how could one see vocals like the guitar and drums in real time? Unfortunately, there is no preview window for vocals. In theory, someone could design one if they really wanted to go in with, I think those things are coded in Perl, is that right? And make a fancy vocals rendering thing. But the advantage you have is that the entire window itself down here, once we have a vocals track, will look more like the thing in-game than the guitar, bass, drums, and keys do. So that'll make sense more in a second. So let's listen to our vocals again. Now, vocals are one place where I would like to open the wave form of my file once again. This is the same guy that we used to do our tempo map, and I'm going to expand it again to get a little bit of a better view. I'm also going to drag my vocals track up here so I have easy access to it. I'm going to expand this so I can see more of it at a time. Now, why did I open this track again? Now, for vocals, you can help find where the individual vocal notes begin and end by looking at your waveform. In very loud or very poorly mixed songs, or in songs like, I don't know, if you're doing like a thrash metal song or a blank core song, it might be a little hard to tell, but in a lot of rock songs, the vocals are mixed very loudly into the very front of the mix. So just by looking at the waveform, you can say, oh, this thing right here is where the vocals start. I mean, not that one in particular, so let's find one. Notice how her saying the word I before I follow starts right here. So this peak that you're seeing, much like we use peaks to establish the tempo map, this part of the waveform is the vocal line that we care about. So now that we've established that here's where the rhythm of the note starts, we need to figure out the pitches, and this is the part that gets a lot of people tripped up. Now, I don't want to say black and white that you need an ear for pitch to do this, because plenty of people have gotten by with kind of half measures and like being able to use reference MIDIs and stuff, which I will probably have to cover in a follow-up tutorial because we're running out of time. But the easiest way is to start sounding pitches down here in the MIDI thing and try to find one that sounds right. Let's do this one because it's more clearly pitched. Follow him. So we have this note right here. Follow. And you don't need to actually be able to sing it out loud like I'm doing. You just need to be able to hear this and say, this note kind of sounds like this other note. I follow. So, the way we will do this is by enabling the FX on this track, and unlike the drums, guitar, bass tracks where it shows us a preview, this will actually let us hear the vocals pitches that we have laid down. So let's say if I just put a random note in here. That very loud and annoying pitch is the pitch of that note. You can also hear individual ones by simply clicking that thing, or by clicking it over here. And as a side note, if you are ever unable to hear that pitch, or if it lags, there is a fix for that. Contact me after class, and I will tell you how to fix that. So we're trying to get this note right here. Follow. So what note is that? I don't know. Fa. That doesn't sound right. My fa. Fa. So let's actually put a note in there, and let's see if it sounds right. Did you catch that? It was very quick. Let's make it a little louder. Using this slider over here, I can say that I want to be able to hear these pitches that I'm generating a little more clearly. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? That's because this is an F, as far as I can tell. I hope I'm not messing this up on the stream, because that would be embarrassing. And one easy way to tell is by continuing to go to the notes around that note and saying, okay, does the way it goes down actually go down in the way I have it set up? So she's singing, follow. So if I have this, that sounds right. So what's the next one? Follow. See, that's not quite right. But that is. And that is because the key that the song is sung in does not have E flats, but it does have E's. So once again, I need to find the rhythm at which this note starts. So let's assume that it's right here where this peak is, though I believe that's actually a kick drum peak, and say follow. And see, now these notes that we've laid out are more accurately matching what's actually sung. Now, the octave of the notes kind of matters. Like, as you can see, if you scroll down here, I'm using my mouse scroll wheel, you have a ton of octaves to play with. If you go down low, the pitch is very low, and if you go up very high, the pitch is very high. The exact octave you author in doesn't quite matter. Some people have an easier time distinguishing pitches when those pitches are higher or if those pitches are lower. I personally have an easier time telling pitches if the pitches are higher, so I tend to author in this high octave, and then once I'm all done, I go through and fix the octave by lowering everything an octave, like this. I'm pressing the down key on my keyboard to move it. You can also use the shortcut Alt and 8 on the number pad, or Alt and 2 on the number pad to move them up, and you can't see because the whole thing is scrolling, but like if I wanted to move these up right now, it's not doing that. Maybe that shortcut is specific to something else. So ignore everything I just said. The point is that the notes need to be correct, not the octave. This thing is exactly the same as that, in terms of how Rock Band will score those notes correctly. And Esper in chat points out that if you author the notes in the same exact octave, you can't always hear this pitch because you're doing it so close to the actual thing. So he recommends authoring in a different octave so that they are more pronouncedly audible over the thing. Do whatever suits your fancy. And so we have another note somewhere around here. But what's interesting is if you hear me position my cursor right here, I can't hear the word him. I can only hear the Maybe I can hear a tiny bit of the I. But this means that my note is not quite on 11.4. It might be a little bit earlier. To me, this sounds like it's something about here. And so what's the pitch? Follow him. It sounds like it's coming back to the previous pitch. So let's say if I put it right here. Now, let's listen to that again. This note is clearly a little bit too early because the pitch it's generating is a little off of the vocals track. So if I highlight it and use my arrow keys on my keyboard, or by dragging it around with the mouse, though I don't do that for these because it generates that annoying pitch, now it's a little bit later. Let's see if that sounds better. A little bit better. Now what's interesting about this note is that the actual pitched part of this note is very short. Again, I apologize that I'm skipping a lot of the basics here that you need to know, such as that you only author on vocals the actual vowel sound of a note and not the sh or the part unless it's particularly well pitched. So what we're going to do is scrub, like I showed how to do on bass or guitar, by positioning our cursor over a particular place. I'm going to turn off the pitch generator by pushing this button here, and then see at which points the note is still making a sound. Him. So in these, it sounds like I've got enough of the note to maybe author it here, but as I get further out, she's already beginning to sing the note down, which is the next one. So generally what you'll do is you'll place the note based on what you can see in the waveform, if applicable, and then you'll try to find where the note ends. And it's much more important that the beginning of your note is completely accurate than the end of your note. So I'm going to call this one good. There could be a case made for extending this note out 1/64th note further to here, but unless you want to hate your life while authoring, you don't need to care that much about specifics like that. If you're really far off, it's bad, but if you're within 1 or 2 64th notes of where the note actually starts, that is almost always fine. Very few players who are playing the song will be able to tell, and you're just going to take a lot of time doing it if you can't. My chat's not updating. Whatever. Ed Tengai says he thinks it's the same note as the previous. Are you talking about this note right here? Let's listen again. To me, that sounds pretty clearly like she's singing "Follow Him." follow him down, follow him, mim da. And so things like this in-depth analysis of the pitch of the song is unfortunately kind of required. Someone in the chat, where was it? Gadwoozer says that they've been using an online piano thing. Whatever floats your boat, whatever generates pitches and makes it so that you can tell what's going on, that's fine. Now, let's cover really quickly the rest of changing these vocals notes. These notes are just 3/64ths long, and not every note's going to be that long, obviously. So let's do the scrubbing that I was just doing, again, to say, here's how long this note should be. Now this sounds alright. I don't want to catch the fa noise at the beginning of follow. And if I were to start like right here, for instance, that would be bad, because I would catch some of that fa noise. Now, the way the phonemes of this word work is that she says follow, and that la noise is part of the thing you'd want the blank space between notes to encompass, because while it is pitched, it's not as predominantly pitched as the other vowel noises. So what we're trying to do is capture the noise within fa, or excuse me, the noise. The fa, we want the but we don't want the la of follow. And so I'm hearing the noise as far as here, at least. And then the next note I want to continue to scrub and find out where it begins and ends. Here, the pitch still sounds like she's transferring between the first note and the second note. So let's keep going. Same thing. But here we go. Here we have a consistent la pitch for follow. Or at least much closer. So what I'm going to do is move my note there. And I think O extends to, or at least about here. So let's take a listen. Doesn't that sound a lot closer than what we used to have? It's important that all of your vocal notes stretch out for the appropriate duration of the note. And it's generally better to err on the side of them being too short, because if they're too long, it leads to people having to sing it in a very robotic and unfun way. Some people will disagree with me. But this Mapty says we'll be covering turning a completed project into a final game-ready file. At this point, I am certainly going to be doing a follow-up stream or two to this, and I will try to do a dedicated half hour or so of taking your completed Reaper project and making it into a Rock Band 3 ready project. Sideshone says, it would be cool if you could just sing into Reaper and it would chart your voice. There is a thing in Reaper that can kind of approximate that, like if you record yourself singing, but it's very, very hit and miss, and it's not very good for Rock Band purposes. I would recommend that people don't try to do the whole, like, record yourself and then have it take notes out, because I've heard some horror stories about that. Ed Tanguy also asks about lyric notes for whistling. They have changed how they've done it in official DLC. I generally try to avoid pitching it unless it's really short, because the microphones don't pick up whistling very well, so I would probably do the open bracket whistle close bracket. So let's continue doing a little vocals authoring here. There's actually an I before I follow him down. And I'm looking at the waveform, I'm seeing that it starts roughly about here, and then I gotta figure out what pitch it is. I, fa, I. So what is that? Let's turn our pitch back on. So that's too high. That sounds about right to me. Fa. Maybe not. Let's listen again. This one's tricky, as are very many lead-in notes just like this. So it's actually an A. So I would do it like this. Him, da, him, da. Where is that? Down. And the final thing I'll cover while we're vocals authoring here is how to do slides. Because this note down goes over multiple pitches. Down, down. And generally I will just try several pitches here if I don't just know the key that I'm in. So where does it start? About here. So I would extend these notes out to be as long as they need to by scrubbing. So the first pitch goes to about here. So here we're hitting the n noise. So maybe I'd go about here. That might be a little long. And so this thing is actually going as a slide, like a little diagonal vocals tube from this guy to this guy. Now, when I go back in and add lyrics, I will do that by adding a lyric like this. The plus sign will be the lyrics. And unfortunately, I don't have time to cover lyrics in their entirety right now. There are several ways you can do lyrics. You can put the lyrics into a text file and then have it import all of them note by note for you. Or as you go, you can say, I want to add lyrics to this. Not by double-clicking it. Double-clicking removes a note. I have personally created a REAPER macro that I will cover in another video that if I hit Control and R, opens an add text event, but I can also click down here in the text event part of the MIDI editor that I have not yet talked about and say, I want a lyric. I make sure that it's lined up to the lyric here, and now if I click this, it will automatically select that lyric, and if I drag it around, it will move the lyric with it. So what I do, if I'm doing it by hand, is Tab will move to the next note in the line. That might also be a custom action, I hope not. So what I do is I tab, I use my thing. This was just the fol note, so I would type FOL hyphen, and then I would do low, and then I would hit tab, him, and then here's down. And now I have a vocals chart. Now, that's kind of simplified, right? I mean, or if not simplified, it means that I did a bunch of stuff that I only know how to do because I've been doing this for a long time. But I promise it gets easier as you do it. Vocals is very intimidating, I'm not going to lie. If one of the things you're trying to watch this video to find out is if you have the chops to do vocals, please don't be too intimidated. Really quickly before I finish this video, I do want to cover importing MIDIs in order to give yourself a starting point. So let's do that. Let's start a new project file. Let's take a media file, and in this case, I'm going to go back to Zach and Sarah by Ben Folds. I have a bunch of MIDIs in here. I believe the one that is actually good is this one. Now, this is a classic, like, internet circa 1998 MIDI that people would embed in their websites and have it beep boop the correct noises at you. So let's imagine that I have my Zach and Sarah project that already has its tempo map correctly set up, which I do. If I take this, this is a very basic MIDI file that I have just inserted into my file using the insert media file command. Each of these tracks is similar to a Rock Band track in that it matches to an instrument. Like here we have piano right hand, piano left hand. Right now we care about the vocals. So I would go in, and even though there aren't any note names over here like there are in our template, it still follows the general basic format. So Zach and Sarah happens to go, Sarah spelled without an H was getting bored. And that's what this is, even though I can't see it because there's no lyrics and no note names. On a PV amp in 1984, while Zach without a C tried out some new guitars. You can get the general idea. So what I could do is Control A to get all these notes. Control C, let's just do this one for now. Go back to my project, go to part vocals, find where the vocals start. Now I already happen to have this one done, but this is very low. So here's some complete ones, but let's imagine that I had just come from my MIDI. I would paste, and it would give me the notes. Now, these are the correct pitches, and this is why I bring this up. If you have a trouble hearing what pitch is what, if you can find a source MIDI for your song, which almost always exists for big, famous, classic rock songs and stuff, because the internet's been around for a long time, this will give you the start that you need. Now, you'll notice in this case, like, let's delete my actual existing ones for a second, and play this with the guide pitch, which needs to be louder. Not terribly helpful, because all of the notes run up on each other. So let's go to 1/64th, like we should be in vocals. What I might do is select all of these guys, and I happen to have a macro that says make these notes a little shorter, which it's not doing. God, I broke something when I set this up. So let's do it by just using the mouse. Now it might make a little more sense. So still not quite right, as you can tell. It's some of them start in a little bit of the wrong places. There's some pitch bends that are not correctly represented. But it's a much better start if you can't hear what pitch this is than nothing. And it does happen that Ben Folds is singing a bunch of A's. So from here, now that I've imported this, I would pretty much do what I just showed you guys. I would look at the waveform. Not that. I would look at the waveform. And this one's a little harder to tell. Let's turn this off so it doesn't make annoying beeping noises. So it looks like of Sarah starts about here. So I might move this guy up a little bit. And I'm not going to go through the whole thing right now because we're short on time, but you get the idea. I would move these around, I would adjust their lengths, and potentially I would even adjust their pitches or add the little plus pitch bend notes that I described before to make this into a kick-ass rock band chart. But that's all there is to it. You import the thing into Reaper, you go into the appropriate track, you find the notes, you copy the notes you want, and then you paste them into the appropriate part in your project, which will probably not match one-to-one measure into the thing. Trojan Nemo points out in the chat that this is how many customs makers do customs instead of what I've been describing from scratch. The best way to do it, I'm going to go ahead and say objectively, the best way to do a custom is like to end up doing everything by ear. And by that I mean if you use the MIDI as your basis, that's totally cool. That's rad. That is a great way to get a good start on your song. But at the end of the day, you need to be able to take what you've heard here, compare it to the actual song, and make the changes. If you were to submit this... if you were to submit that to us at C3, we would not release it, right? Because it's wrong enough that you would be able to even tell in game that it's wrong. So, you know, go in, learn the ropes. Don't feel like you have to be perfect. I am very sorry if I've been establishing the wrong kind of guideline for you guys here, but just, you know, do what you can, and we are always here to help. The main thing that we want to try to establish about the customs community is that it's not like, fuck off, everything needs to be perfect, go away if you're not a master. Like, we want more people creating customs. We don't even necessarily care if you're great. We just want you to help, you know, because everybody can become really good, but you can't become really good if you're not even trying. Edtan Guy says, I often hold Alt and click drag the time marker to make it loop a split second of it. What he is saying is, in either this or this, you can create time selections. I guess you can't in the MIDI editor, I forgot. And if you want to loop a particular measure, you can just left click and drag, it'll create this. You can click this thing down here which says loop. And now you have your sweet dance remix. But you can do that if you want to scrub a section over and over again as well. I personally prefer to hit something and just, you know, the manual dance remix. And what I just did, by the way, to cancel this, if you hit escape on your keyboard, that will clear that out. Infoman says I should have tutorial videos on YouTube for every step. Yeah, the main problem is that I'm very lazy, and doing a live stream like this is much more palatable to me than sitting down and having a plan, because that requires effort. Alright, so before we go, let's cover up a few loose ends here. Pro keys is the other thing that hangs a lot of people up, much like vocals, simply because it is a very similar process. You'll be laying down note tubes like this, except that they will be 1/16 notes usually, just like guitar and bass, for every note in the song. You can use a MIDI, as like we have here. Let's take a look at Zach and Sarah's famous right-hand piece, which goes deedle 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 a bunch for the entire song. I used this exact MIDI file to help create my Zach and Sarah Pro Keys part, because it would have been a pain to place all of these notes otherwise. I would just copy all these, I would paste them into Pro Keys, I would adjust them to the correct octave if necessary, because you only get 2 octaves to work with in Rock Band 3 Pro Keys. And then that's good. It's like Trojan Nemo said, things like this are an excellent basis to create a custom. It saves you so much time. Once upon a time, I was kind of an elitist dick, and I was like, oh, MIDIs! Oh, you kidding me? Who are you? But no, it's actually a very good idea. If you are able to find a source MIDI file like this for the song that you're interested in doing, highly recommend it. So that's that. We've covered we've covered the incredible basics of guitar, bass, drums, and 5-lane keys. We've talked about vocals and pro keys. There's a lot of things I haven't had the time to talk about, like text events in a file. I can give you a very basic thing like that. Like, here's my completed drums chart for Echo that we've been listening to. Excuse me. Text events can happen to do stuff like play. The play event here tells the in-game animations to start for the drummer. And it'll also have things like intense to make him go crazy. All of this is covered in the Rock Band Network documentation that is available as a link from our website, customscreators.com. A lot of that might be a little bit dense and hard to understand until you've gotten into the authoring scene a little bit more thoroughly, but it's always good to have there as a reference. Text events for vocals will be your lyrics. Like, here's our completed vocals chart for Echo. And what other relevant text events are there? If you go into your events track, these are also very important things that we haven't covered. They are documented in their entirety in the Rock Band Network documentation. I might delve into them deeper on a follow-up stream, but this gives you stuff like practice sections. Like, here is PRC intro, which stands for practice intro. Here's the verse 1A, verse 1B, and so on. What's very handy is that the venue track, another thing I didn't cover, this is where you lay out camera and lighting events. You can have Magma, the tool that compiles this file into a Rock Band file. It will generate venue events for you based on these practice sections. So not only does having practice sections let your users practice your song, it will help you generate venue stuff without having to work at all, and as previously mentioned, I'm very lazy, and I love being able to do things automatically. Satan's Best Buddy says, can I replicate the glitch with the camera focusing on the drummer in a white space and nothing else happens? Yes. You can pretty much make Rock Band 3 sit up and beg if you would like to do so. Ernie1 would like to cover about ProGB. Yeah, I could do a tutorial video on ProGB if there's enough interest, but as Esper has said in the chat, a lot of people choose to eschew doing ProGB because it's really complicated. Basically, you have 6 horizontal notes like this, like you do for guitar and bass, except each one is a string on the guitar, and then each note has a velocity number in Reaper. So show velocity numbers. You can't see that on that. Let's make it green. Or red. And this velocity number, which again I'm not sure you can see, is what fret it is on that string. So you get to go through, make a bunch of different velocity numbers on each thing, and it takes a long time. People have created tools to help automate it. I recommend that you Google around for like Rock Band Customs ProGB, but it is definitely outside the scope of tonight's thing. Anything else in chat? Does anyone have any questions? I can go a little bit over 2 hours if we have a Q&A part of our presentation for this evening. I mean, there's so many things I haven't covered. I apologize for the incomplete nature of this. We will definitely do a follow-up stream to at least cover Q&A things that you guys might have to ask, and the events track and stuff, and packaging the song. But for right now, any other questions? Satan's Best Buddy asks, where do you download Reaper? That is reaper.fm. Oh, dude, I can even change this text. Hang on, let's be fancy. Reaper.fm. Reaper.fm. The tools you need are Reaper from Reaper.fm, the Rock Band Network and C3 templates and plugins from customscreators.com. In our, what forum is that? Customs authoring support, I think. The other people from C3 who are listening to this are going to kill me for not knowing that. Harmonies! Jerry1G-Man talks about harmonies. I agree. Let's take 5 minutes and talk about harmonies really quick. Everything that I just discussed for harmonies, for solo vocals, also applies to harmonies. So let's hide our velocity numbers again. What's the shortcut for that? There is not one. So view. So here's a vocals part. So that's solo vocals. Solo vocals and the Harm 1 track are almost always identical. The vast majority of songs, the lead singer is on both Harm 1, which represents the blue line in the harmonies part, and part vocals, which is always blue because there's only one singer. But then you can get into harmonies where multiple people sing at once. Let's take a look at the harmony section right here. That's really loud. And in fact, I wasn't at a harmonies part. Here's a good one. Now what I was doing there is letting you hear the harmonied pitch overlay. Let's take another listen. So that's harmonies. The only difference in actually authoring those is that you have another track, Harm 2, where your actual harmony notes will go. So let's ignore Harm 2's pitch overlay for a second and just listen to Harm 1. And also, so let's listen to what's actually being sung. Steps up to the mirror, then gets a little nearer to see a little clearer. So what you can hear is that the female lead vocalist is doing a doubled vocal underneath that is a different pitch, and that is pretty much what harmonies are. He steps up to the mirror, then gets a little nearer to see a little clearer. So what's really tricky about harmonies that I think hangs most people up is that you have to figure out what those lower pitches are. Now, there's not a one-size-fits-all solution for doing that. If you have a source MIDI, much like the one that I showed for Zach and Sarah, those will often include vocals harmonies in them, so that will save you the trouble of having to find the pitches yourself. Otherwise, here's my Harm 2 track, and here's what just the harmony sounds like. Steps up to the mirror, then gets a... So let's compare that to the lead one. Oh, that's clear. Now you can hear those notes harmonizing with their gritty square wave pitch nonsense there. And I wish that I had the time to go a little more in-depth on the nature of harmonies and how to figure it out. To an extent, you kind of need to learn a little bit about music theory and how to reduce by like a fifth or whatever, or the common ways that harmonies are often expressed. Lower harmonies like this one are often challenging as well because the higher ones are usually easier to hear in the mix. Really quick, let's go over this as if I was authoring it from scratch. Like here's the track with nothing overlaid on it. Steps up to the mirror, then gets a little nearer. Let's listen to this again, and this time in your head, as much as you can, focus on the lower vocal. Steps up to the mirror, then gets a little nearer. Steps up to the mirror, then gets a little nearer. And that's hard. That's hard to pick out. Steps up to the mirror, then gets a little nearer. So again, like vocals, when you're not sure of the pitch, the easiest way is usually to go in and start clicking until you're able to find what is causing that. And right now I'm actually fixing this so it will play the things while paused. Steps up to the mirror, then gets a little nearer. So like, let's imagine again that I didn't have these. Steps up to the mirror. I know that because I've already authored it that the lead vocal goes like this. Steps up to the mirror. Steps up to the mirror. So now I'm trying to find something. I know it's below, right? So maybe one thing I could do is copy my lead vocals tracks. Get into 1/64th like I should be. Zoom in a little bit. And paste them so they're in the same place. Now you can see up here that the notes line up. They're starting and end points. So now I have the same pitches from the lead as I do on my second harmony, but that's not correct because they need to be lower. So let's take another listen. Steps up to the mirror. So this is the note for steps, steps, and we need it to be lower. So let's experiment. Like, let's try this one. And then delete these temporarily. And in fact, that won't make much sense if I don't do something else. So let's just move these down a few. Just some random number of notes and see if that works. And that sounds like crap. You can tell if you mute the vocals here. That does not sound right at all. So, one thing that I like to do is hover over each pitch right now, outside of actually listening to the song. Steps. And so if I was in solo, I would know that's steps, steps up, or where is that? Steps up to, and we're in harmonies now, so let's say steps up to, I don't know. I'm sorry, I had more in my mind for this, but you get the general idea, is that harmonies just kind of are a pain in the ass, and you have to go through and figure out each pitch as you go. But highly recommended that you use source MIDIs if you need to, or if you can, rather. And then it's kind of just a crapshoot. do your best. Give it to us on customscreators.com if you're having trouble, and we will be able to at least give you a starting point if harmonies are something that really stymie you at every turn. If there is interest, one of my follow-up streams to this, and it is after 7, so I'm going to call it quits here in a second. One of my follow-up streams could be devoted entirely to harmonies. Esper points out a very important thing, which is that you can multiple select, like, okay, so hold shift and select this to select multiple things. If I then hold Control and Alt and hit E, it will show me both tracks overlaid on top of the other, which is awesome. So here's what they actually started out as, right? No. So here's my completed harmony track. And you can see that they're staggered off of each other by the appropriate amount that the harmony is. Now this is a finished one, but this kind of display, and again, that's selecting multiple tracks and hitting Control-Alt-E, will let you see different ones overlaid.
Just up to the mirror, then gets a little nearer. Gets a little nearer.
So this can be very helpful to at least say, all right, I've copied it, and now here's the original one. Like if I copied it fresh, they would look like this, because they're all on the same. Or, you know what I mean. I don't have time to make it actually look proper. But then I would drag it around, it would look different, it would be awesome.
Gets a little nearer.
And other than that, harmonies are unfortunately a little bit out of the scope. All right, I have a few minutes. Any other final questions and answers? There are so many things I haven't covered, but as some people are saying, thank you. I hope this has been at least a little bit useful. A live look at Reaper is often very nice just to know how the program works in the first place. Questions that I can answer in a minute or two. Anyone? Sorry, I'm also catching up on the chat because I've been lazy and haven't been reading it. Drum mix. Nemo points out that the drum mix is an important thing. Very briefly, the game needs certain text events at the beginning of the drums part to tell it what things to... like, let's imagine, right, that you do have a multi-tracked song. For harmonics, they would like to get the stems as, like, the snare drum was on one stem, the kick drum was on one stem, and then, like, the cymbals and everything else were on their own stem. And each of those would be silenced individually if you missed, say, a cymbal but not a snare. That would make it sound a little more realistic in game. Now, because we don't even have separated drums at all most of the time, let alone individual ones, we use the drums 0 event, and documentation for this is all available in the Rock Band Network docs, so don't worry about it too much. But the point is, at the beginning of all your files, you need to have these events in there, and I believe, as Nemo is going to pimp out, our new Magma C3 Rocks edition, which you should all be using to build your songs, will automatically insert those for you if you don't have them. So, props to, like, dude, mega props to our chat buddy here, Trojan Nemo, who made all of these tools pretty much from scratch, or has modified Harmonix' tools to be even more awesome. He has put so many hours into it. You guys should all metaphorically SSD for having done such a good job on that. All right, cool. Yeah, sorry that I didn't have a little more time to show you guys more in-depth stuff. This video will be available on demand after I am done, in case you want to refer to any particular elements of it later. I'll try to create an index of, like, this time signature is where I talked about this. But otherwise, I will be doing a follow-up video at some point in the future. I hope that this was useful. I will see all of you guys at some indeterminate point in the distant future, the year 2000. Goodbye.